I'm Don, and today we're going to talk about adjectives in German. Now this will be hopefully not too long, but it might be a little bit of a longer presentation because there's a lot of information to cover with these. And we're also going to be focusing on just the nominative and an accusative case in German at this point in time. So dative and genitive, if that's something you already learned, this video will only help you review nominative and accusative. So with that said, let's get moving. Now in German, adjectives usually agree with gender and the case of the noun that it's describing. Now this is something that you've probably already very familiar with or have heard 1,000 times already. You have to pay attention to both gender and case in German. And I say this is usually the case because of one thing, and we're going to start at this one thing first. When an adjective follows the noun that it's describing, then you actually don't have to worry about any adjective ending at all. So what I mean by this, for example, if you say the boy is small, notice small comes after the boy, right? We're describing the boy, he's small, but that adjective is coming after the noun. If I say the small boy, where the adjective comes before the noun, small boy, right? Then that's when we get into a different set of rules. So let's focus on what happens when the adjective follows the noun. In other words, the boy is small. This often happens, as in my example right there, after the sein, to be, right? Werden, to become, or bleiben, to remain the same. So for example, again, as I said, the boy is small, that is, to be, is right there. And this is where this normally occurs. So for example, if you look up small in the dictionary, if you look it up in your textbook, you'll see that small is klein. That also means short. Now, this is your base form of the adjective. That's what you find in the dictionary. If you look up small, it's not going to give you anything but klein. It's not going to give you these adjective endings that I'm talking about. And this form that they give you, this is your base form. Okay? Now, again, as I just said, if it follows the noun that you're modifying, you don't need to worry about any changes. So the child is small, for example, would be das Kind ist klein. Nice and simple. You just take klein from the dictionary or textbook. It just goes in there. You don't need to worry about modifying or changing it at all. So notice I did nothing to klein at all. So it just goes there after the noun describing the kid or the child. And this is true of any adjective ending that you might use if it comes after the noun. You just don't need to worry about it. Now this changes when the adjective comes before the noun. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. For adjectives that become before the noun that you're describing, you need to include its adjective ending. And this adjective ending will depend mostly on two things. One, as I mentioned previously, the gender of the noun it's describing, and the case that that noun is in. So again, nominative, accusative is what our focus is at this point. So let's take a look at that and see what I mean. Now, you'll probably see a chart very similar to this in your textbook. If not, make sure you open your textbook and go to that page because I guarantee you something very similar to this is there. Now, you might have a chart that has everything on it, nominative, accusative, dative, and genitive, and that's fine. Keep that whole chart with you. However, as I said, I'm only going to focus on the two cases that we know so far, which is nominative and accusative. Nominative, of course, being when it's the subject of your sentence, and accusative when it's the direct object of your sentence. So let's take a look at these few examples here. Notice on my chart I do have a little section of it kind of colored in orange. These are, some people refer to this as the Oklahoma chart because it sort of looks like Oklahoma. And so if you're really good at memorizing patterns and memorizing this chart exactly as it looks on this page, then you could always kind of remember this Oklahoma pattern. If you're not so good with that, I wouldn't even necessarily bother trying to memorize that. So there's three main sets of rules we have to follow with adjective endings as I get into this now. The first set has to do with the definite article. And remember, this is our the in German, der, die, or das. Okay? So if your noun has der, die, or das in front of it, you have to follow this set of rules. So for example, if you have the man, which is masculine, it's going to be der Mann. And hopefully you're following around this chart with me. Now, when you have der, or I should say in the nominative case, this is the subject, right? What's nice about it is you just add an E ending to your adjective. So notice on my chart, it's der alte Mann. Or excuse me, der junge Mann. I said that wrong. Now to look at the next one, we have something feminine, a clock. Die alte Uhr, the old clock. Notice the ending on there, it's E as well. Neutral, picture for example, das Bild. So das alte Bild. Now before I go on further, just look at this Oklahoma pattern that I have in orange here. notice what they have in common with their adjective endings. In the nominative case, they all just get an E ending. Okay? So it's just a marker. It lets us know we're in the nominative case and everything is fine, right? But you don't want to forget these endings. You don't want to say der Jungmann or die alte Uhr. It does need those endings. So again, nominative, der, dir, das, it just gets the E ending. You don't need to worry about anything else. Notice nominative in the plural, it does get an EN ending. Okay? EN ending. Now, what happens when we switch to the accusative case? What if the noun that we're describing is in the accusative case? In other words, the direct object of our sentence. For example, I see the young man being our direct object. If you remember, masculine der becomes den, right? It gets that en ending. So what happens with our adjective ending then? It actually reflects that masculine accusative en ending. So notice in my chart I have den jungen Mann. En is posted there at the end of the adjective ending. Now what happens? What do we know already about feminine and neutral in the accusative case? If you think about it, you should come up with they don't change at all. It still stays, D for feminine stays D, nothing changes, and das for neutral stays das, nothing changes. So guess what? Their adjective endings don't change either. So die alte Uhr if you look at my chart, or das alte Bild if you look at that chart. Nothing changed between nominative and accusative. Now let's go over to the plural in the accusative for the lovely, right, children. Die lieben, it gets an en ending, children. Okay, Kinder. So what can we tell from this chart overall with nominative and accusative? Essentially, that der, dir, das, and the nominative just get an E ending. And again, we already know in accusative, die and das doesn't change, so we don't need to change the ending there at all. But what we got to watch out for are two main things here. If it's accusative masculine, you just follow the pattern. Accusative masculine becomes en, so the adjective ending also gets an en. The other thing to look out here for are the plurals. And the plurals, if you look at the chart, they're en no matter what. So there's really nothing for you to worry about there. If you just remember that plural is en, you're good to go. Okay? Let's do a few examples. Now you can pause this here if you want to, and I'm going to give you the example. And I'll say it in English, and you can try to translate that into German. Okay? So after I give you the examples, feel free to pause and test yourself if you would like to. So you could say, for example, the young man has an old clock and an old picture. Okay? The young man has an old clock and an old picture. The second sentence you could practice is, I see the young man. And if you don't remember the verb for to see yet, it's sehen. So ich sehe. How would we change that then for the young man? Okay, because now it's going to be an accusative case in the second example, right? So pause this here and give yourself a test if you want to. I'm going to move on now. What you should have is der junge Mann hat die alte Uhr und das alte Bild. Notice the adjective endings there, right? They're just the E's. Der junge Mann is nominative. It's the subject of our sentence. It just gets the E ending if you look at our chart. And die alte Uhr und das alte Bild are now the accusative objects in this sentence. And if you look at your chart and you match feminine accusative and neutral accusative, you'll see that the adjective endings don't change at all. So you just insert the E's there. What about our second sentence example? I see the young man. What you should have here then is ich sehe den jungen Mann. Right now, I'm the subject of that sentence. But what do I see? I see the young man. That's our direct object. So, again, what do we know about masculine when it becomes accusative? It gets that en ending. So you have den, and that den, that accusative masculine ending, just transfers over to the adjective ending. So, jungen Mann. So, that is the very first thing you need to look out for. Words that start with der, die, or das. However, as I said, there's three ways, so there's two more sections of doing adjective endings. The next one is what happens if you're not using der, die, or das, but what happens when you're using ein or eine, our indefinite articles, the words that mean in German. So, moving on to this section here, again, we're going to focus on nominative and accusative. Now, take a look at this chart, and I'll just kind of walk you through it. Notice here I have a few exceptions marked in the orange, okay, things to look out for. And what you see here is, again, what's masculine indefinite article? It's ein in the nominative case, right? Sorry, in the nominative case. And if you look here, I have ein Mann. But look at the adjective in between it, that young again. Notice what it's changed to this time. It's junger. ein junger Mann. So this is where it gets different. If you look at ein doesn't tell us really if it's masculine or if it's neutral, right? Look at a picture, ein Bild, just 2 columns down, right? Because neutral is also ein in the nominative. It doesn't change, right? So how do you know if something's masculine or neutral? If I said ein Mann, a man, or ein Bild, a picture, we don't know if that's masculine or neutral. And so what the adjective ending does for us here is it indicates to us what that gender is. This is why it's important to know your genders in German. So again, if it's masculine, you had the ER ending, right? Der, right? Now notice on the nominative adjective ending, what do we have here for masculine? It's an ER. That ER, that masculine marker, just transfers right over there in the nominative case. Same thing with feminine. Feminine always has an E ending. So it's eine, and look how that E ending just transfers over into the adjective, right? Alte. So really nothing actually changes with feminine here. It's pretty simple. Now take a look at picture. Picture is neutral. It's das, the S ending, right? So we have ein, and then look at our adjective now for old. It's got altes Bild. Why is it ES? Because it's telling us that it's das Bild, right? The picture. And that S is telling us what gender it is. And again, neutral, if you remember, does not change in the nominative, so it's just an S ending. Nothing happens to it. Okay? And notice for the plural I have not available. Why? Because you can't say a plus plural. I can't say a books. I can't say a kids, right? Can't do it in German, can't do it in English. So that way you don't even need to worry about this with the plurals. All right? So let's move back down to accusative now on this list. I have here einen jungen Mann. And again, if we reflect a little bit, what happens to der or ein when it's accusative? It becomes einen. It gets that masculine en ending that we always see with masculine accusative. Okay? So what happens now to the adjective ending? As it always does, that case and gender marker transfers right over to the ending. So the en switches right over too. So einen jungen Mann. What happens to feminine now as we move one column over? Remember, feminine actually doesn't change in accusative at all, so there's nothing for you to change here. It's still eine alte Uhr. Okay? But how about neutral? You've probably already guessed neutral also doesn't change in accusative if you remember how the case works. So there's actually nothing for you to change. We have ein, and then we have altes, right? We got to show the gender, and then Bild. Okay? So that's the difference between der, die, or das, and ein versus eine. Be very careful here with the ein words, meaning ein or eine. And this, later on, you'll find out is connected to mine, my, or yours, deine, right? The same pattern will follow, and we can address that at a later time, but just make a little note for yourself. But you can see that when you have the ein words, that the gender transfers over, and the case, over into the adjective itself, okay? And you can see clear examples of that in ein junger Mann with the ER, and altes Bild with old picture. Now here again, I'm going to give you the 2 examples, and you can, after I give you the examples, you can pause and test yourself if you want to. But if you wrote this time, a young man has an old clock and an old picture, okay? That will be the first translation. A young man has an old clock and an old picture, okay? The second sentence is, I see a young man. So feel free to pause it right now if you want to and test yourself. I'm going to move on to the answers. For the first one, you should have ein junger Mann. That's our subject of our sentence. So if we go back to our chart, you can see the subject masculine, when it's an ein word, there's ein there, gets an ER ending on our adjective. So ein junger Mann hat eine alte Uhr. Here's our direct objects, our accusative. But again, feminine doesn't change, so the E ending just stays. Same thing with Bild, neutral. That S ending just stays because it doesn't change in the accusative. So, ein altes Bild. Now what if you want to say, I see a young man? You should have, ich sehe einen jungen Mann. Again, why? I'm the subject. What do I see? I see the direct object, the accusative object. And remember, masculine switches to the en ending. So, einen jungen, that en transfers onto the adjective, Mann. Okay? So that's the second way you can deal with adjectives. There is a third way, and I'll try to go through this as quick as I can. And that's what happens if I don't have any article at all. What if there's no der, die, or das? Or what if there's no ein or eine there? What do I do then? Well, do you remember with the ein or eine, I talked about this idea that you still have to show gender and case somehow. And this appears right here as well. Take a look at the chart that I have up on the screen, and what you'll see there is, look at masculine nominative. I don't have der, and I don't have ein there. I just have young man. Notice what's at the end of that adjective, young. It's the er. Why? What am I doing? I'm showing the gender and the case. The gender is masculine, the case is nominative, and nominative masculine is just er, right? So that's why you have er there. Let's take a look at the accusative form of that now, masculine. What do we already know? Masculine er becomes en in the accusative. So take a look at young man in this sentence. You get jungen Mann. So really all what we're doing is these adjectives, their endings are taking the place of what normally the ein or the der, die, or das would do. Okay? We can see it again if we look at just old clock. So for example, feminine has the e ending, and also we already know nominative and accusative feminine does not change. So it just keeps that e ending, nothing happens. So you have alte Uhr or alte Uhr, an accusative. So here for neutral, I have a slightly different example. I have Wasser instead of picture, Bild, okay? Das Wasser. So take a look at this adjective ending in this particular column right here. Now notice again, we don't have the, but we still got to show somehow what gender is water. We know it's das, okay? We also know that das in nominative, nothing happens to it. Nothing happens to anything in the nominative. It just stays the same, so it gets the s ending. So take a look at cold. It gets the es ending, kaltes Wasser, okay? How about neutral accusative this time? What do we know about neutral when it's accusative? It doesn't change. Das doesn't change to anything in accusative. So that s ending to show its gender still gets put onto the adjective. So take a look. We have kaltes Wasser again. Now, the last column is plural. Now, think about plural nominative and plural accusative, okay? Think real quick. Does die, plural, change at all in nominative or accusative? And the first answer, hopefully, that you come up with is no. It doesn't actually change or have an effect on anything. And what's the ending that normally goes with die? It's e, right? It's just the e ending. So notice here for plural, I have liebe Kinder for both of them. It doesn't actually change, okay? So that's essentially the three different ways you can do adjectives in German. There's a pattern if the noun you're describing starts with der, die, or das. There's a different pattern if the word starts with ein or eine, and there's a third pattern if you don't have either of those available, okay? So let's do an example together, and after I give you the example in English, feel free to pause and test yourself if you want to. Let's say you're talking about, for example, that you had cold water. Maybe you had cold water in the house. So the sentence I want you to say is, I have cold water. How would you maybe translate that in German? Feel free to pause right now, and now I'm going to move on to the answer. And that answer should be, Ich habe kaltes Wasser. I have cold water. Notice again, I didn't say I have the cold water. I didn't say I have a cold water. There's no the or a. There's no article in front of it. It's just cold water. And again, I noted here that Wasser is das, and I got to have that es ending on there. So Ich habe kaltes Wasser. All right. So that essentially wraps up our adjective ending presentation. Again, I apologize for it being a lot longer than I intended. But as a quick recap, if the adjective again follows the noun that it's describing, this is usually after sein, werden, or bleiben, then you don't even need to worry about these adjective endings at all. You just put your base form in there. However, adjectives before the noun have an ending that matches both the gender of the noun, the number if it's plural, of course, and the case that you're in. Unfortunately, they're really, again, like many things in language, no easy way to memorize these or just instantly know them. The best suggestion I have is make a copy of that chart that you have in your textbook that you're using, or you can find a German adjective ending chart online anywhere, and keep that with you. And every time you're editing a text, refer to your chart. You know, look at your sentence and go down your chart and go, okay, it's an accusative object, it's masculine, so it should have, and it has der in front of it, so it should be this ending. Or, you know, it's feminine, it's eine, it's nominative, and you can look at your chart and you can chart it right there, and you can see that it has the E ending. And that will kind of help you start building a foundation anyways for memorizing these things later on. The more you can kind of use that chart and keep using it and always remind yourself of what those endings are, the quicker it'll start to kind of form in your head and you'll start to remember those things. But keep that chart with you. It's pretty handy. As always, if you have any questions, please ask your instructor. Thank you.